Warm welcome again, good morning. What I want to add to the remarks of Douglas from an operational perspective is essentially two aspects with regard to asset management. One, how do we as CORESTATE think of asset management as a strategic task, and how do we carry out in that respect the client-centric approach that we actually create value in the asset management segment. And the second one is, I want to illustrate that with a couple of examples that will hopefully enable you to better understand how this is being carried out in practice and not just a theoretical concept. So the first slide, the most important message to see here is on the very right of the sheet. It's essentially the fact that CORESTATE has a fully integrated real estate value chain. And that may sound obvious, but it is actually not, and I know that from comparison with other asset managers. CORESTATE, unlike other asset managers, really has property managers in the group fully integrated with regard to all the different asset classes, so that we can actually carry out what is the business plan and what is the strategic endeavor in which asset management is being perceived in the group. What does that mean? If you think of asset management as strategically thinking about each and every individual property, you need to ensure that you will actually carry out what you conceptualize. And the way that this is being done best is if you have all the elements of the value chain within the group. CORESTATE does have that, and that's not an obvious distinguishing factor as against other competitors. And it really trickles down all the way to the property management, to facility management, to all the different aspects on which you have to do the groundwork with regard to properties. That is essentially the way that we think of asset management. Now, how does that relate into practice? This is a very confusing, fuzzy slide, if you will, and it just wants to show you one thing. When you think of asset management, you have to deal with a lot of internal and external stakeholders, and it can be very confusing unless you have a coherent strategic vision with which you can actually make some structure and get some order into all the fuzzy different players that you have in asset management. The way that we carry this out is the following. You have to think of the value chain in asset management, and you have to really concentrate on what are the driving factors essentially in each individual property in order to carry out the best value. Because the client-centric approach, let's face it, it really gets down to that aspect. You have to add value, and the asset management, the quality of asset management essentially depends on whether or not you are able to create added value. That has to be done best if you think of properties not just in a general way. There is no one-fits-all approach. It needs to really come down to the individual property at hand, and you can best show that with complex properties that are not core already, but have a way to go in order to get in that core segment. Douglas has already touched upon the manage to core approach, and I think CORESTATE is uniquely qualified to carry out that manage to core approach, because CORESTATE as a company has a long-standing track record in also dealing with complex properties and really managing them in a way that adds value best to the commercial owners of the property. If you look at asset management and the value chain, it's very simple. There are a couple of drivers, not that many. Essentially, letting is a major driver, vacancy reduction is a major driver, stepping up the tenant quality is a major driver, and also how you invest in the property and what specifically you invest in a property. Do you refurbish? What type of investment do you want to do? Do you reposition a property? These are the drivers that you have to think about strategically in order to be able to do the best value that you can probably get out of any individual real asset. Now, this is an abstract claim, and I've brought to you 3 examples in which you can probably see how we have done that in the past, and more importantly, how we want to convey that in the future. First one, 2 letting examples. If you look at this property, it's a property in a smaller city, a B city, B to C city, I would say, and the challenge in that respect was essentially to reduce vacancy. You can see an initial vacancy rate of 26%, and also to increase the fixed term, the fixed lease term. We had an initial walled fixed lease term of 3.7 years. What had to be done here was to do some extensive renovation and conversion essentially of the first floor, because that was the major problem of the property. And what you can see in the exit scenario, in less than 1 year of development, was not only were we able to reduce the vacancy to a margin of 3%, but also were we able to substantially increase the WALT, the fixed lease term, to almost twice the initial time, twice the initial period of time. And you can see that how this reflects in the exit euro per square meter, and the overall purchase price. The next asset, seemingly similar from the outset, also a major letting and refurbishment effort, but with slightly different parameters. Because what you can see here was, if you look at the WALT, at the fixed lease term, this has not changed much, and this was not the major task. This was not the driving factor for value add in this segment. Rather, it was that we had to have some conversion of formerly retail space into office space, and as a result, reduce the structural vacancy, thus making this property more appealing in an overall setup. It may seemingly sound insignificant if you reduce vacancy from 6 to 0%, but if you look at how we at the same time increase the net rental income by more than 10%, and the overall reflection of these parameters in the euro per square meter and the exit purchase price, you can easily see that this is a value driver, and it really depends on how you focus on. These are two shopping centers, so seemingly similar property, but the way that you strategically look at a property and carry out the strategic thinking in the individual asset management segment is all that you really need in order to get best value out of the asset management exercise. Now, the next one, before I get into the next one message about what I really want to say with this. This is the hot topic of so-called vertical expansion. And the reason why I've chosen this example is the following. CORESTATE, as you have seen already in the remarks by Lars and Douglas as well, is a innovative player that really looks into the opportunities of innovation and thinking ahead of the curve. And I think if you look at the two lease examples that I just gave you, this is classical, traditional asset management. It won't be sufficient in the future to just think of asset management in the way it currently is or it has been. We really need to think ahead of the curve. We really need to think about innovation. Douglas has identified some major megatrends already. We will hear from Stuart about the micro-living segment later today. And there are other trends that really have to transpire into the asset management operation, in the ongoing operation, in order for maximum value to be carried out. Vertical expansion is a situation in which urbanization trends, the need for additional densification in urban areas, is being carried out with a smart strategic approach where you look at individual properties and look at how you can actually enhance the current quality, the current structure by thinking out of the box and thinking on how you can create extra value by not looking at a property from a traditional old school perspective, but rather looking at the innovation that you can actually bring to the table when you think out of the box. And this is being illustrated with one ongoing project that is not yet carried out. It's in Dresden, and you can see there that if you look at a seemingly vacant parking space on top of the property, traditional, typical building, and you look at the possibility for vertical expansion through a modular construction here, that this is the value driver, how you can actually create some additional value. This is not just adding storage areas or storage space. It is rather about a modular concept that will reduce costs, and at the same time, if you look at the drivers, if you look at the net lettable area, that will significantly expand, but not with the means of traditional building, not with the means of just adding stories, but rather with the means of a modern, smart, modular concept that will actually carry out something that has not previously been around in the real estate segment. So that's essentially what I wanted to bring to the table with regard to asset management. Summing up my brief remarks, CORESTATE is a fully integrated group internal real estate value chain from all the elements, all the way from facility management, fund management, up to fund management with property management, asset management, all the different elements of the value chain combined. We have a profound real estate expertise all across the risk spectrum. We don't just know how to manage core properties, but we rather know how to manage opportunistic and value-add properties into the core segment. CORESTATE fancies a proactive approach. We are looking for innovations constantly. You will see that as a recurring segment of all of the speakers that we're hearing from today. And we think we are ahead of the curve when it comes to innovation in asset management, generally speaking. That applies to digitalization as a megatrend. It applies to our process tools, and it specifically applies, and that's probably the best way to hand over to the next speaker, Justus, to the ESG segment, in which we think we have a really unique selling point in the way that we carry out our ESG strategy. Justus, you have the floor. Thank you.